Hello, and welcome to the Specialty Matcha Podcast. My name is Ryan. This is my co-host Zongjun,
Hello, hello, konnichiwa.
and we're the co-founders of Sanko Matcha Products.
Yeah, so we launched this podcast to discuss our learning journey in matcha, share startup stories, and interview experts. And today we are having our very first episode record in Kyoto, Japan.
Yeah, we're in Japan. So we're trying to record a couple of these throughout our trips. We're sourcing, trying to meet farmers, trying to understand more about the traditions and the way these products are marketed and sold domestically, and also talk to farmers and see what is it like from the people that are on the ground, and try to get the perspective from the outside in and from the inside out. And something that we're realizing, we were just talking about this last night, is that matcha and learning about matcha is less about finding the truth and more about finding perspective. Like you find people, even the
Yeah,
people we have talked to so far this trip, just have radically different ideas about perspective and
right.
things that we were expecting to get pushback on, saying, oh no, not traditional, we don't want to do it this way. They're actually, everyone's very open minded to it in places that we didn't expect.
Yeah, truth is almost a illusion. Like there's no such thing as truth. There are things that people do, and people believe in those things that they do. But like they might actually contradicting to each other.
Yeah.
What exactly is the best matcha?
Or what is real matcha?
What is real
Or
matcha?
authentic or traditional?
Mm.
And even the shading mechanisms. We were at one of the museums in Uji, and these shading canopies, right? They were an innovation 400 years ago.
Mm.
At some point, what we consider traditional now was innovative. And you can say the same thing about industrial ishiusus or the granite stone mills that make matcha. Used to be that everyone milled their own matcha at home. The product that you bought 150 years ago was tencha, and then you milled it at home. And really, it was just for the elite, people who had the time, the luxury, the taste, that cultivated their preferences, um, and had the hardware to physically create this matcha. So even saying that these new industrial motorized ishiusus that mill matcha, that is an innovation.
Hmm.
That,
Hmm.
a lot of the times when you're from the outside looking in, it's seen as this must have. Without it, it's not really true matcha. And it does produce a higher quality product than a lot of the smaller hand milled ishiusus for sure.
Hmm.
And I believe that a lot of the producers, that if they do it by hand, they actually mill it twice,
Hmm.
because there's just not enough time in the grind phase.
Hmm.
So it's so interesting searching for these different perspectives.
Yeah, and not to mention about like the endless pursuit of umami-ness in the current day
Mm,
matcha. That's actually very modern. Like people back in the days, as we talk to farmers that were actually working in Uji, they don't really they don't fertilize their matcha to the nth degree as we are seeing nowadays. And there were no such thing as they call it hinjun, so the cultivars. Everything was xylite back in the days.
or seed propagated.
Yeah, seed propagated matcha. And like it's all of these that we are perceiving as a status quo or norm nowadays is really not that traditional.
Yeah.
And we taste some of the matcha that were produced in a more organic, more natural.
I think it's better to almost call it a garden.
Yeah, garden method. It's very good, very tasty.
Yeah.
I
And
like
they're
it.
not crazy umami bombs,
Hmm.
right? Like it seems like the Japanese mass market preference might even be different than the Japanese specialty preference,
Hmm.
which is much more complex and less one dimensional, as some of these just straight fertilized umami bombs that, we've all had.
Well, like you really see that kind of quality differentiation, and it's actually reflected by the price in retail stores.
Mm.
You don't necessarily see that in Uji or in farmers during the farmers conversation. They don't necessarily categorize their tea's quality in terms of how
Umami.
in terms of how the retail stores are doing.
Yeah. But I mean, if you do go to Uji as a tourist, you will see that. right?
Yeah,
You
in
see
the
all of
Uji
these retail
retail
places.
stores in the Uji main street, of course. Yeah,
You really have to go underneath the surface to make
yeah,
some of these discoveries.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So today we wanted to talk about what it's like to be a retail customer in Japan, in Kyoto, in Uji. When you go to these very traditional matcha houses, blending houses, traditional matcha brands, what it's like trying to understand what products they have to offer and what the range of flavor profiles are. So we have some experiences that we would like to share, and then some sort of reflections on what our observations are so far and some of the different perspectives that we've heard. So, we are going to talk about a few specific brand names here. And we're actually going to talk about some tasting notes that we did, but by no means should anyone please don't take away that this is like a review episode. We're reviewing matcha. We're going to try our best to remove
Yeah.
our subjective judgment. We will share our subjective opinion about our preferences and whether or not we liked it. But by no means is it a judgment, and it's very much a reflection of our own taste.
Yeah, I can be totally contradicting to your own preference, and we're definitely going to save you from some very loud sipping noise ASMR.
Yes, we already tasted it. We took the notes. So without further ado, we went to one of the coolest retail experiences you can have for matcha when you come as a tourist to Kyoto. And I will not attempt to butcher the name. I'm horrible with names. I'm horrible with pronunciation. And by the way, I have very little or limited Japanese language skills. Sam has a decent amount. So between his Japanese and the people that we're trying to purchase from and their English, some communication does happen. But I'm sure it's a very different experience shopping at these places if you're fluent in Japanese. But Sam, do you want to talk about the experience of walking into the first place that we went to?
Yeah, let's go one by one. The first one is Ryoen. The name means willow and sakura flower garden. It's a very nice retail store sitting in the middle of Kyoto City. And as you walk in, the whole store is laid out with a giant tatami mat sitting in the center. And you sitting right next to the tatami. And they will come by and greet you with a very ice cold gyokuro. And as you sipping the gyokuro tea, they presented you with a menu and they expect you to choose from it.
And this is
We
a
ask if we can taste the matcha. We ask what are these matcha taste like, and the answer is no. You cannot taste the matcha, and the answer is going from left to right. The left is most bitter. The right is most
most
sweet.
sweet. And this is like if you've ever been to a Japanese restaurant, it's like this very long menu on this elongated printed sheet of paper. And it looks like there are about 25 different choices as it goes across the paper, ascending in price. And there's very little, we have it in front of us right now. So, Sam, with your language skills, can you sort of break down what you're seeing on that top row?
Yeah, so the entire menu is breakdown into largely two categories. So the top row is matcha, and the bottom row is gyokuro, sencha, and bancha, and all the other miscellaneous tea. And for the top row, you have all of these poetic names, something something shiro or something something mukashi, with a endorsement sometimes by some Iamotos of certain schools.
So Iamotos are like the headmaster, the head
Right.
of that institution. Like the Iamoto of Emoto Senkei endorses this product. It's a
Mhm.
blend for them, or Ura Senkei, or some of the, I think some temples too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there will be a nice little note saying that if this tea is suitable, more suitable for usucha or koicha. And then you have the price underneath.
This tea retail in Japan is much more affordable than what you'll find online in the States or in Europe.
Yeah, and this is like one of the oldest and more like most reputable tea garden in Japan in Uji. So
Or a tea blend house. I think it's not all their tea. It's
yeah, that's right. Some of their teas will have a note saying that this is straight from their own garden, and some others do not have that note. So I would say it probably implies that they would, procure tea from other gardens too.
And just to further contextualize this place, I know that Kettle's Matcha Milk Club we'll sometimes buy tencha from this producer, considered to be a very famous blend house, and they'll mill it
Yeah,
fresh.
I think my impression of this house goes way back. To
Does it?
Yeah, to 2017,
That's right,
2018.
with the koikes.
Yeah, with Koike Sensen. So during the Cha Kabuki event with the Koikes in New York, one of the game tea is Ryoen. The
Ah,
other is Kambayashi.
ah.
Yeah, so I remember that very vividly.
You have a great memory. All the matcha helps. So we asked about all of these blends, these 25 blends. Like, what's the difference? Why is the most one more expensive? And why is the cheapest one the least expensive? We asked what the cultivars were. We asked how fresh it was milled, or like if they have a guarantee. Like, is this how old is the oldest one on this list? Like, how old? Like, when do you no longer willing to sell it? And they told us 3 months. So everything is supposedly milled within a 3 month window. It's a lot of inventory to hold. But although, I mean, with all these endorsements, they probably have a lot of local buyers, right? For
Mhm,
all of these Iamotos, right? They're
mhm.
using a lot of tea. And all of these institutions are. But supposedly it's all milled within 3 months. But nothing was refrigerated, surprisingly. When we got the tea itself, at least it was not cold, or
Yeah.
at least the can wasn't cold. I don't
Mm.
know if they transferred it to order and it was in the refrigerator, but it's unclear if it's cold storage within those 3 months.
Yeah, very unclear. And most of the tea, actually, I think that's the only tea house or tea store that we went to that doesn't have a refrigerator. All of their matcha is just sitting on the counter.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and for all the other stores that we've been, they always have a little like glass refrigerator that people just store their matcha in it,
Yeah.
and you can see through.
This is something that is important to note. I went to the store about 2 years ago, and I bought a lot of matcha that I was kind of consuming over the next couple of months when I came home. This store uses paper packaging, so it's a standard tin where there's like one thing that slides down to close the tin, but they put a piece of paper around it.
Mm.
So it's an unsealed tin. It's not modern packaging technology, which is both very romantic. But by the time I opened it, I bought a lot of tea, so maybe a month or two after I came home, I opened it and compared it to some of the modern packaged tea
Hmm.
in these perfectly sealed containers, and I bet some of them are nitrogen flushed too to remove the oxygen. The quality degraded very quickly. Like, this is clearly a local institution. You're meant to buy locally and consume quickly. And this is not modern packaging technology. If you come here and you buy something, don't camp on it. It is not sealed. It's not really properly sealed. I mean, it's not a criticism. It's just you have to modify your behavior to the way that this is intended to be, the way I'm presuming it's intended to be consumed.
Well, it's also good to see that a lot of these tea houses are adapting to new technology.
That's true.
Yeah, it's
Even some of the most traditional houses that are using the nitrogen flushing perfect sealed can
yeah, it's great.
really preserves the product in
Mhm,
a radically better way
mhm.
to make it more accessible for all of us.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
back in the day, I bet, with the before this technology existed, by the time this can got to you and before modern air freight travel, it wouldn't have been as good.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
when matcha was debuted, in the early days at the Paris, expos, or when in the early days it came to New York, it was this packaging technology.
Yeah,
Even if it was great tea,
it's not good anymore.
it's not as good
It
anymore.
tastes like seawater. Empty, so empty. I don't know. Like when people talk about Japan, like especially traditional industry in Japan, like people like to almost romanticize like the traditional way. Like traditional is always better. But we sometimes forget that this is also a land of technology. People like
Very true.
people are very innovative and very technology driven here in Japan too. So like there's nothing wrong about it. I think it's a good practice that your matcha can sit much longer and fresher in the fridge. Mm.
Absolutely. Some institutions, you just have to modify your own behavior. This tea is not modern packaging technology. It's just a continuation of the way it's been done, which is a beautiful experience to have. But maybe don't buy in bulk here for later unless you're going to transfer it to different packaging.
bring a nitrogen flush machine with you if you decided to procure here.
They weren't able to answer a lot of our questions around what was most expensive or least expensive.
Yeah, we got no information about the cultivar, which
Uh,
we actually did from other houses. So they're holding very secretive information onto that.
mm. And there's very little information we can get from the name. Zongjun, can you like list out a few of these names just to add a little color of like what a consumer has to work with when they go through these 25 different matchas?
I see. You have from the cheapest, which is one of the matcha we end up buying and tasting. It's Goku Mukashi.
Mm.
Literally means extreme nostalgia.
Okay.
Very nostalgia. It goes
Okay.
way back. You have Matsuno Shiro, so pine white, and you have mountain peak white. You have little road white. You have cloud on the river white. And you have Hatsumukashi, which every single houses that we have been to almost all feature this beautiful name.
Hatsumokashi.
But as we learn, it doesn't really mean anything. It can be sold for like 500, 600 yen per can, or like 40, 100 yen per can.
Actually, let's put a pin in that. That's super interesting to note. Is we keep seeing Hatsumukashi everywhere, and we
Yeah.
became very curious. So we started looking around different vendors online while we were here in Japan. In For Iporo, for example, I think locally it's 600 yen, and they kind of recommend that it's like confectionery grade or latte grade, very cheap. 600 yen's like $4, very cheap. And then in other vendors, it's like usacha or koicha, thick tea grade, where it's very much intended to be consumed on its own.
And
So
for
imagine you're someone and you're just getting into matcha and you're looking around online and you try a can, oh, I like this Hatsumukashi, I really like this blend. And then you try a different house. What we're learning is that it's a completely different product. And actually, the poetic name doesn't mean anything brand to brand to brand. You actually need to know blank person or blank company's Hatsumukashi. That part of the name is indeed meaning, I mean, it might have some poetic meaning specific to that house, but it has no meaning between vendors. So,
yeah,
what really you need to know both parts blank person or blank things, poetic name.
yeah, and well, like we have learned, a perspective from one of the retail store telling us that like mukashi is usually good for koicha, and
Shiro.
shiro is usually good for usucha.
So, put in
But
other words, Mukashi is usually higher quality because you can drink it more concentrated. And Shiro is according to this person,
it's usually lower quality,
and
and
can be suitable for
for
more dilute
but
scenarios.
it's not always true. So, like in Ryuan, for example, Goku Mukashi is the lowest tier of their matcha category, their matcha scheme. So, and you actually have two Mukashi named matcha in the very lower end tier of this.
And in our tasting, we just tasted a bunch of matcha that we're going to talk about in a second. That was the only one we didn't attempt to make into koicha. Usacha, the thin tea was enough. We were not going to try that 4x concentrated.
Very, very interesting.
We'll
We
save our
also
stomachs.
we also learned from one of the farmers that we end up visiting is that a lot of these are just they're basically a retail marketing strategy.
Oh yeah, farmers don't care about these
They
names.
do not.
This is a layer much further downstream. Like, this is fiction, actually.
Yeah,
Like when you talk about like these brand fictions, these brand stories, like it is fiction on a per house basis. You can think of them as different cinematic universes, right? One company can be Harry Potter, another company can be Star Wars, another company can be Tolkien, and the words between them are not transposable.
yeah. It's almost like parallel universe. Hatsumukashi doesn't mean it's Hatsumukashi is not Hatsumukashi is not Hatsumukashi.
Mm.
They all live in different life with different price tag.
Yes.
Very interesting. Very confusing.
Very confusing.
Mm.
So, as clueless consumers for this particular house and what all of these mean, other than saying endorsed by Amoto Senke, Uda Senke, whatever, or this temple, that temple, we said, okay, this will be a cool experiment. Let's buy the cheapest one and let's buy the most expensive one on
Mm.
the spectrum and compare them. So that's what we did, and we
Yep.
just tasted them.
So the first tea that we taste is Gokumukashi.
And we paid 864 yen, so about $6.
Mhm. For
40
40
grams
grams.
or
Yeah.
30 grams. I think it's
Can you
30
double check,
grams.
right?
Let's see. 36 grams.
Okay. Interesting. Not standard grammage.
I guess so.
Mm.
36 grams.
Okay. And
We
it's
either were cheated 4 grams from our 40-gram can or given an extra 60.
yeah,
Six, excuse me.
it's a mandatory tax for the matcha guy in Kyoto. But it's noted that it's suitable for usucha, and that's all the information we have.
Was a beautiful color.
Mm.
Honestly, if you saw this in a store or in any retail shop or at someone's home, you would like think, wow, this person has some very good matcha. And this is a fine example of color being actually a very bad indicator. The color was amazing. It foamed up amazing. We got amazing micro
Yeah,
foam.
the appearance is deceiving.
The appearance was incredible, like really, truly incredible. So when people talk about beautiful color matcha, it really is just for the eyes, especially in this case.
Well, I mean, like appearance for matcha is a very important criteria in matcha grading
But
and matcha competition.
very true. By no means this one did not disappoint on color. I mean, if you compare, this was way better than a lot of the random ceremonial matcha powder. Like if you go to Whole Foods and buy like a random ceremonial matcha powder, this is probably better than that.
I mean, it's indeed a fresh product that's almost guaranteed.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Fresh, very local product. And by the way, we prepared this as usacha. We used a standard recipe of 2 grams to 60 milliliters of water. The water was 75 degrees Celsius, and we used um, local, or not, we bought locally some water, some spring water at the 7-Eleven.
It's mineral water from Fuji Mountain, actually.
Very
You trust
nice.
the label.
Uh,
So, what do you taste, Ryan?
So our tasting notes was that it was definitely sharp and had some bitterness and structure, but probably in a way that it would be very nice in a milk context or a dessert context. If you wanted really high quality matcha, like a matcha tiramisu or something, it has the pungency and intensity to cut through something. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was a bad thing. And it was a fine usacha otherwise. There were some nori notes, but the more we talk about nori notes, especially across this set, like, not all nori is the same. This
No.
was the slightly more marine, fishy nori than like the more pure, delicious.
Or I would say not all umami is the same.
Mm.
Like this is
Well,
nori.
even with nori, no, I think there's
This-
flavor variation in
Yeah,
nori.
that's true. That's true. But this one is like very nori.
Cheaper nori.
Seaweed, sea salt. Sorry, I don't like this tea. It's
Um,
very bitter,
it was
very pungent,
it was very one-dimensional, very
very
powdery,
one-dimensional.
very green, very little umami. I thought very little umami, but I got the nori smell.
Yeah.
Kind of like if you go to a random grocery store and get if you're making sushi at home and you're just buying nori or nori that's used in like kimbap, Korean kimbap without the sesame oil, they have similar quality smell. It's not a bad thing. It's a little marine. There was no aftertaste, and it was indeed very powdery and kind of had a weird mouthfeel.
The powder texture is definitely coarser than the other tea that we have drank today. So,
But honestly, from our preferences, it was not that bad. From where we are in our consumer journey, it is head and shoulders better than a lot of the other stuff that mysterious self-graded ceremonial grade or super ultra premium ceremonial grade that you'll find in other places for literally 5 to 6 times the price. So nothing to complain about here. All right, the most expensive. Would you like to introduce that tea?
yeah. So this one also it has a very poetic name. It means like the mukashi of the top of the textile. Whatever that means. I mean, I'm literally reading the kanji. Like it could have a slightly different meaning in Japanese.
Mm.
But it's not endorsed by any of the Yamamoto. But it does have a tag saying that it's very premium grade product, and it's suitable for koicha. And it also has a special tag saying that it's from their home garden. So very interesting. And it has a price tag of 3,780 yen.
So about
Or what's the grammage?
40 grams, even
Oh,
40 grams. And so it's what, about 28, 29 US dollars, depending on the exchange rate. This one visually looked very similar. I actually thought it
yeah.
was slightly less green,
But the foam is definitely finer.
way and more.
Yeah.
It foamed much faster, and the foam was kind of more fine,
And as we dumped the matcha from the can into the bowl, we discovered much more clumps.
much clumpier.
Yeah.
So our suspicion is that it was milled finer, or maybe milled more slowly, so therefore it was milled more finely. At least when you're talking about an ishiusu, and smaller particles have stronger cohesive forces, and they're more likely to clump.
That's right.
Whereas the first one was a little more dry sand. Definitely, you could feel some particles. It felt slightly, maybe it was, they were really speeding up that ishiusu, but this one felt much more silky.
And tastes silkier in mouth too. So
Yeah, absolutely. So it was very sweet. It had this very localized sweetness. For anyone who has the reference, there's a candy in the States called a Smartie. It's basically a crushed up sugar cube of powdered sugar. And I think there's some acid. It's either citric acid or maybe it's tartaric acid. That's very localized, but it gives this very localized sweetness. Kind of
mm,
like a monk fruit, local, like you really feel it in one part of your mouth.
yeah, yeah.
So this one had a very similar vibe going on, where you just got these very local pockets on your tongue of sweetness.
And it's also not only like a synthetic sweetness. It's mixed with this very like fresh, very lively, like iki, like people in
Mm,
Japan would say.
okay,
It's like almost like the smell. For me, it's like the smell of sweetness from like a fresh cut grass or
okay.
fresh cut lawn. So it's not necessarily a plus for me, but that's a reference that I'm getting.
Weirdly enough, I didn't like the sweetness either. It
Yeah.
was very off-putting to me. It did have umami, which was a completely separate tasting note to the sweetness that we were referring to. Creamy. I got an edamame note. Zongjun, you mentioned soy milk. I think
Mm.
it was a pretty similar note we're
Yeah,
talking
like
about.
some nutty, rich kind of flavor.
Yeah,
And the umami for me is not nori. Like it doesn't have that kind of like aquatic, oceanic kind of flavor. It,
absolutely.
yeah, it's very just like a pure, like savory umami kind of
Mm.
feeling.
We found it much more complex. It did have some bitterness, and you got a light white flower aroma, which
Hmm.
I didn't write down in my notes, but in retrospect, I could definitely see that. So that was it as usacha. And then it was very interesting. We made it into a koicha
Mm.
and had a completely different
The
experience.
sweetness really intensified.
And the umami really intensified.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got a nori note,
Mm.
but not the fishy marini nori note. I got like when you come to Japan and you have onigiri with the really high quality seaweed. When you take that first bite, I get this pure nori taste that's
Mm.
not like directly linked to this fishy, like lower quality seaweed, but this pure, I don't have a better word than like high quality nori.
Yeah, I actually I have a very different feeling about that koicha in terms of its umaminess. I think it's for me it tastes like a very thick miso soup. Like
Mm.
it's the umaminess from miso.
This is so weird. I
Mm,
actually haven't, I didn't share this with you during the tasting, but I wrote it in my notes. It had slight, almost cheesy chèvre or goat cheese, fresh goat cheese savoriness with a little bit of funk. It wasn't
mm,
like as funky or barnyardy as like some chèvre or goat cheese can be, but there was this fresh goat cheese savory, creamy something, but with the aroma of it too that I tasted in this.
yeah, yeah. Very interesting. I actually like the koicha more.
Me too.
For the first usucha is definitely not a this preference, and for this one as a usucha, I would say it's neutral. But for koicha, I actually like it.
One thing that I noted was that the complexity didn't change. So the intensity changed between the usacha and the koicha, but the complexity was just different. They
Mm,
were completely different profiles in a way that can describe as non-linear. It's
mm,
not like by making it Koicha is 4 times more concentrated, but it didn't concentrate the flavor 4 times. It was more intense, but it expressed completely different flavors. All right, so we tasted one more that we want to share, and we hope that this tasting isn't too boring. Please let us know in the comments or reach out directly if you like or dislike this. Anyway, so we got a recommendation from Cole from My Matcha Addiction, who recently traveled to Japan to try a tea called Tenju. So Sam, do you want to introduce this tea a little bit? So this is from one of the foremost blending houses that everyone knows, one of the largest. I think they do about $50 million a year in revenue from what we've been able to research online.
Yeah, so the tea house is called Marukyu Koyaman. And from all the kanji that I'm able to read from the little tag
Of this tea specifically.
of this tea specifically, it's very highly praised and awarded tea by the Bureau of Agriculture and Aquatic Produce. And it specifically noted that it has a very unique flavor of oika that's written in this text. Usually people don't write that as one of the description.
Very rare to
Very
see that.
rare to actually see that.
In our experience, at least.
Oika means like the fragrance coming from
The shading.
shading. For almost all of the matcha, they are all shaded one way or another. But this one, as humble as Japanese people can be, they actually had the intention or the willingness to actually write that down on a piece of paper. I think they're very proud of this tea being very oika. So I'm very looking forward to taste this tea.
This was the second most expensive matcha I've ever purchased. I think the most was from Mark from the company Oika in New Jersey, who mills matcha fresh in Lawrenceville, which is a fantastic Uji Hikari. But this is the second most expensive. And this is the most expensive tea that you can purchase. I think that's non-competition grade. They might have competitions that are way more expensive, but it's the most expensive normal quote unquote tea that they sell. It was, did I write down the price? No. It was around $50 US, just under 7,000 yen.
Did you learn about the cultivar of this tea?
No information.
No information.
So this is a mystery black box blend. Most likely, maybe it's single cultivar, maybe it's not. I don't know what the harvest was. So in the spirit of these blending houses, we will just enjoy it.
Yeah, let's just enjoy it. Very interestingly, that a lot of these people don't tell you, what exactly goes into these cans. Although some tea houses did end up telling us.
We were in Uji with Konbayashi, I think.
No, Hori Shichimene.
Oh, that's true. They told us the cultivars.
Yeah. And one of their very poetically described matcha was actually single cultivar. But only for this year. It's not always single cultivar, which is very interesting.
I said this year, this is just Sayamidori, but sometimes it's a blend. And then we actually got to meet the head blender there, the tea master that they had, who came down very briefly. So that was really cool to get to meet the artist, the master himself, who makes these decisions and puts these blends together.
Yeah, that was very cool. Anyways, let's describe the tea, I guess.
Yeah, so this was by far one of the most unique matchas I have ever had in my life. And Cole made a similar observation when he reviewed this tea. We both got the same note at the same time from the smell.
Yeah, it's just straight up olive oil.
Incredibly high quality olive oil.
Yeah, the very tingly, almost spicy kind of smell and taste. Very, very good.
It was so subtle, so soft when it entered the mouth. It entered the mouth like water. It kind of just gently and gracefully came in and melted away, and then it blossomed and developed. And something Cole mentioned, and we totally agree with, it is effervescent. It almost pops. You get this sparkly, tingly sensation. And I've never heard about this in Japanese tea, but they actually talk about it quite a lot in Chinese tea and Taiwanese tea. So I know for the highest tea producing region in Taiwan is a mountain range called Dayuling. And in Dayuling, one of the ways that you can taste the altitude when you're really deep in the weeds of high mountain Taiwanese oolong is it starts to develop an effervescence.
Yeah.
deep minerality, but also a deep effervescence. It wasn't an umami bomb, which was surprising to us. So
Mm.
this oika smell is almost spicy, high quality olive oil,
Oily, rich, very like very wholesome.
very wholesome and integrated.
Mm.
It wasn't the separate component flavor. It was very integrated
Mhm.
into the profile. And I don't know if anyone's ever had the reference of all of these new olive oil lattes, the olietos. I think
Mm.
you can find them at Starbucks around the world. I had one when it was released in Milan. I just happened to be there at the time, and got to try it, and it works so well. So sort of the same way that olive oil interacts with fat. If anyone's ever had an olive oil gelato, an olive oil ice cream,
Mhm.
or even there's a tradition of putting, I think that's an Austrian thing, you put pumpkin seed oil on ice cream. This fat, plant fat, mixed with ice cream or cream, has this very distinct textural sensation.
Mhm.
And it's very similar to what's going on in this tea.
Yeah, and I think that sensation really magnifies after we turn that into a koicha.
Yes.
Mm.
So that was all of it is usacha. And
Mm.
in koicha, completely non-linear again. Nori note, magnified, I swear it was 10 times.
Mm.
It was so beautifully pronounced.
Mm.
And it's not the seaweed that like you hear like someone in the US or in Europe talk about. It was this high quality seaweed note. It wasn't marine fishy weird. It had this purity to it.
Yeah, it's very very beautiful. It's like almost like kind of like you will get from some very high quality fresh oyster. Very
Yes.
beautiful, like light salinity, but it's
Mm.
also very intense at the same
Yes.
time.
Oyster's a great note, like a great oyster.
Mhm.
Interesting. Yeah, I totally get that. The effervescence completely also magnified. I wouldn't say 10 times, but it was more sparkly. It kind of popped. There was some bitterness
A
to
little bit,
this,
not bad.
but I think I would have enjoyed it less without that bitterness.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
needed to be supported by something.
Yeah, it's almost like in Italian wine, you need that bitterness
That
to
those
construct
tannins.
the structure, offer a skeleton of the flavor profile.
Absolutely. Without it, it would have been overwhelming, I
Yeah.
think. And it had a beautiful, long aftertaste. And I would say a Mark from Oika has talked about this a lot, is that aftertaste is one of the most difficult things to achieve. And that is something we've noticed in this little experiment that we've done, is that the aftertaste and price are highly correlated.
Mm.
At least a pleasant aftertaste, I should say. The cheapest one did have an aftertaste. Well, actually, it has very bitter and then just fell off.
But something very interesting so far is that we only revealed 3T today, but we have tried other matcha too in this journey, and some of the highest price, highest quality matcha, they do not necessarily taste that umami. It's like the lower end product that are really the umami bomb,
Yeah.
or like just pure burst of umaminess straight up into your face, pungent.
Or a lot of these like more expensive mainstream blends from these large blending houses. And I think it's a reflection of average Japanese preference.
Mm.
These blending houses are trying to go after the largest domestic market they can, probably. And like most Japanese people are not educated in the appreciation of matcha.
And I would say that's a very old preference.
Yes.
Like something very interesting that
Or older generation preference.
older generation
It's
preference.
modern if you really zoom out.
Like like something we saw very interesting in Ryoan in Kyoto is that we were sitting in the tea store. The demographic of consumers entering the store were largely just two groups of people: clueless tourists and
foreigners
foreigners,
like us.
us, and like very very old Japanese gentlemen that probably had decades of experience in drinking matcha, and just straight up went there to the counter, point at the exact tea that he wants. Interestingly, no female consumers. So just point at the tea that he wants, and then take the tea and left.
Yeah.
And all of the coolest kaijin just wandering around the shop and like, oh, what kind of tea is this? What is that? Can I have matcha? What is sencha? And asking all these questions.
And the retail staff is This is not a criticism, but very few of them speak English. It's a lot of Google Translate that we saw going on, or some limited language skills from people on both sides. But I was surprised that there wasn't more knowledge transfer to get anyone to appreciate anything. Honestly, if I was super into matcha and was just coming to Japan and trying to learn, this is the wrong place to do that. Japanese consumer retail for matcha is not the place to learn.
Mm. Yeah, it's the information is very not transparent. It's the opposite of transparency.
It's top-down positioning. This is good. This is bad. This is the best. And then at one of these conversations, we purposely tried to experience what it would be like if you tried to learn at these stores. And I was asking a bunch of questions, and Sam was helping me translate. And I was like, "What makes this so good? What makes this high quality?" And she's like, "We use better tencha." What makes the tencha better? I don't know. Better tencha. Like they don't know.
And I think that our question actually made that guy very uncomfortable. He was like very like trying to divert answering some of the questions.
Yeah. So it's even the training that goes on at a lot of these places. And I'm going to bring this full circle, actually. It's very interesting. All of the good places in New York, for example, the training obviously is like one of the biggest barriers to hiring staff to provide retail experiences or tea experiences for people because they need to be able to hold a conversation to tell someone what's special. The best way I've seen that is that it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and everyone kind of feels out where your knowledge is, and then they kind of meet you where you're at.
Mm.
The worst implementations I've seen of it, this is super rare. This is some of the best matcha that's ever been imported to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You should appreciate it. We fly this in all the time and blah, 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 blah. And it feels like you're being lectured at, and it's very condescending. Hate that. And then where you really see the top best way to learn about any of this, honestly, I think is in Bangkok. It's when you walk into a place like MTCH, they will not only meet you where you're at, but everyone is trained. And we got to see some of the training that was being done at MTCH. They have like everyone that goes through and works and is able to interact with the customer. They have these booklets, they have these quizzes. Everyone is so well educated and everyone is trained kind of like at the highest levels of like nice hotel luxury that you can go to, right? Like there's so much training that goes into meeting someone where they're at to make them feel comfortable. And I think that's what makes Bangkok so special, is that they're just so much better at holding these conversations in a way that makes it approachable.
I think that's ultimately a cultural difference, right? Like people in Bangkok, I think the very intention or the methodology that they're applying here to the customer, I would say it's identical to how they learned matcha in the first place. They want to help people enjoy matcha the same way as they approach matcha and end up learning and knowing and liking matcha. All of these information are so gated in Japan is that matcha, to be honest, was not for the common people in the
No.
past. It's very much a luxury for the nobles, for the literatis, for people that can afford the luxury of having people carrying their tencha jar all the way from the tea store to their home and hand grind them at their house.
With all the equipment and the bowls and the whisks.
Yeah, it's really the modern technology invention, the innovation that made matcha so accessible today.
Your average Joe is not drinking this stuff.
It takes hundreds of people literally to make a can of matcha back in the days.
They were importing special jars to age the tencha from China. Like this is not something, and this is back in the day when China was making completely different connotations. China was making the best ceramics in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the Ming Dynasty emperor banned matcha or mocha. Like he grew up from a peasant family and probably even participate in making matcha in China. And it's really just hundreds of people serving one dude that end up buying that jar. It's kind of ridiculous.
The privilege of writing this very nice poem about this experience for how many people's lives had to bring it to him.
Yeah, so once he crowned himself as emperor of China, from day one, he issued a policy to ban matcha. let's stop making this.
So in many ways, it's actually a modern miracle that we can buy this 36-gram can of matcha for $6 and have it be something that looks beautiful and tastes probably very great when you use it in certain contexts. And for not that much more, you get something that is really a work of art.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, Goku Mukashi. Sorry for shitting on you. You're great.
Even over the course of this conversation, it's like, you know, it's just different perspectives. There's a totally rational argument, and I can evangelize this matcha, or I can completely give it a hard time. And it's just different perspectives. So to have this go full circle, it's not about truth seeking, about what's good, what's bad, what's authentic or traditional or blah, blah, blah. It's really just perspective searching, perspective seeking. So if we contradict ourselves over the course of this, or over the course of many episodes, great!
We're learning.
We don't want to make the judgments.
We're
right?
sharing our learning journey in matcha.
We just want to search for these different perspectives, which is why we find this industry so interesting. So that's the end of this episode, end of this topic, I should say. We've exhausted.
Our journey in Japan continues.
Exactly.
We are still in Kyoto. We are going to visit more tea farmers in Uji in the upcoming days.
And in Yame.
And we are going to travel to Izumo and then Yame. And then we are going to come back to Japan in the future.
Very, very near future for harvest season.
Yeah.
So we've been invited to pick some tea, which is extremely exciting for us.
Yep.
One of the very traditional heritage farms. So we're beyond honored.
For me, I personally had, I think, my favorite matcha in my life so far in that farm. So that was great.
Crazy moment.
Yep.
We are beyond touched. Yeah. So we have many other topics. We have notebooks full of notes that we're going to slowly organize, and we'll keep recording and try to share as much as we can.
All right. That's, I think, all the time we have today. In a full week in Kyoto, I still haven't done any sightseeings, Ryan. We gotta do some sightseeing.
It is a Sunday.
All right, let's go.
All right, let's go. Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving us 5 stars. And we're going to go get some lunch, and we're very grateful for your listenership.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.